Hello, welcome to our first discussion on general principles and speech anxiety. Today, we are going to cover what is the definition of public speaking, communication variables, which are basically dynamics that are present in any communicative setting, whether it's a speech or talking to somebody one on one, a small group. General principles, so these are basically just guidelines to apply, again, to all communicative settings, things to keep in mind. And then communication apprehension, which is basically the academic term for anxiety or fear associated with communicative settings. And obviously we're going to focus on how to overcome it as it applies to public speaking. So before we start, and given that this is our first video, this is something I like to talk about at the beginning of all communication courses. And usually, as we go through the quarter, you're going to see that I'm going to have various quotes, and some of these will come from people in business. They will come from people from all kinds of walks of life and and they'll apply to different concepts and settings. But basically, quotes that kind of deal with something that we're going to be talking about in the course. And so you have this quote here, and this comes from business. This is from uh, a guy named Michael Hyatt. He's the former CEO of Thomas Nelson, which is, depending on the year, the number one or number two publishing company. But anyway, it says people rarely get where they want to go by drift. So the question that I want to ask you here, or that I want you to think about, is what does this mean? People rarely get where they want to go by drift. Now, it kind of sounds like something you'd see on a motivational poster. You're hanging in the wall of some office and it's somebody like scaling a mountain, right, with the hook. They're like, it's like a scene from Cliffhanger. So what does it mean? Okay. So if you think of the concept of drifting, this comes from sailing, right? So if you get into a sailboat, right, you get in the boat and you're not going to paddle, you're not going to steer the boat. You're just going to let the sails take you where it wants to take you, right? What are the odds that you're going to get where you want to go? Like a pre-planned destination. Not very good, right? Because you're just going to go where the current takes you, okay, or where the wind takes you. And so the point of this quote is that you're probably not going to get the things you want in life if you don't have a plan, right? Like that's what this quote's trying to say. You have to have a plan and you have to actually execute the plan to get there. You got to have both, right? You actually have to execute as well. You have to have some follow through. And now the reason I'm using this quote, by the way, so just bear with me for a minute here, is basically this kind of deals with why we make you take this class, right? So public speaking is required for pretty much every major on campus, and so that's kind of what this quote deals with. So just kind of bear with me while we kind of like flesh this quote out a little bit more. So this concept. So here's one of the things that researchers in social psychology and cognitive psychology, really it's more cognitive psychology, I should say, kind of know. So um, when people sort of research this, is um, most people, unfortunately, it's not even like a young like college student thing, although obviously there's people in college from all kinds of age ranges and stuff like that. But here's what we kind of know: most people actually go through their whole life just drifting. They don't have a plan at all. Okay, and they're shocked when they wake up and they're 90 and they're unhappy, right? It's like people wake up when they're 90. Personally, I think if you wake up and you're 90 and you wake up, that's a good day, right? You're 90, right? Like I think any day above 90 is probably a good day. But anyway, you wake up and it's like we look under our pillow and we're really pissed now because not only did the tooth fairy stop coming years ago, but the success fairy and the happiness fairy and the personal fulfillment fairy also stopped dropping by, right? And we're upset, we're disillusioned, disenfranchised, you name it, right? Well, what I'm trying to say is some of that's a you problem, meaning you got to look in the mirror. Like some of that's on you. And here's why: because people don't have a plan and they don't execute the plan. And then they're shocked that the sailboat just took them to the middle of the sea or to a port they didn't want to go. Now, that's a big accusation to say, well, most people don't have a plan and they're not executing it. Well, here's how researchers kind of know this about people is, and there's all kinds of studies done with this, but for example, you can walk into a college class and let's say you have, and again, your college classes, it's mostly people in their late teens, early 20s, but there's a kind of a huge age range. But again, these studies are done with people like where they select a group of 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds. It works with kind of all age ranges until about, say, 40-year-olds, I would say, when it starts to flip a little bit. Because then people start to think, oh crap, I better start to get a plan, right? But anyway, here's how this works. So you come into the room, and let's say you generally have you've got 25 people in there, and you can hand them a piece of paper and a pen, and you say, tell me what you want out of life. Just tell me your ideal life. Okay, what is your perfect world? And because in your life, you've got these areas of your life. You've got your mental health and your physical health and your finances and your career and your relationships and your spirituality, like whatever matters to you, right? And you say, what is your ideal life? Just write it down. Like if you whatever you write down, we will grant you. It's like we have genies, right? It's like Christina Aguilera, she walks in, Robin Williams walks in, um, and Will Smith, because they were all genies once, by the way. Pop culture reference for you. And they got some time on their hands and like, hey, we're gonna grant your wishes. People can't do it. In other words, they don't know what to write down. I mean, think about it right now. If I just said, here's the paper and the pen, can you write down in 2 minutes what you want, in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes what you want in these areas? People don't even know. It's like we spend more time scrolling through social media, watching the latest hot thing on TikTok and Netflix than we do, watching ESPN and football on Sunday, than we do actually figuring out watching, these dating shows or whatever, love something, than we do actually figuring out what would make you happy, right? Or what would make me happy. And then we're shocked when we're not happy, right? And so here's the point. It's deduction, Watson. So in other words, it's reverse engineering. If you can't tell me the destination, you sure as heck can't tell me you got a plan to get there. That's how we know people are drifting. They don't know the destination. Right? And again, this works with 30-year-olds, 40, about really it's like mid 40s where people start to go, oh, I need a plan, right? And then you start to see the flip, right? And so, there's a life lesson here of don't drift and have a plan. You can't just be wandering and just hope that life works out for you. You got to have a strategic plan to get there, right? In whatever area of your life, right? If there's something you want, the point here is you got to know what it is. And B, you then have to come up with, okay, now that I know it, how do I get it? What do I do to get it? By the way, there's a second little corollary thing, just real quick, and then I'll explain what this deals with, why you take the class. A second little corollary here with this research is sometimes, too, they'll do like a follow-up where they say, second part to these studies, where they say, okay, you know what? We caught you off guard. Think about it for a week. We'll bring the genies back, right? And then you can come back and tell us what you want. And obviously it's hypothetical, but like people know they're not going to actually get the things, but they give them more time to think about it. So when people come back, most people, and it doesn't have to be you, right? So you don't get accused of being shallow or all these things. They come back and you ask them what they want, and they say, so let's take money, right? And the researcher sometimes will ask them, so before you tell us, I just have a question. Did you think, is your goals like closer to like, would you rather make 30,000 a year or 300,000? Well, 300,000, right? Do you want to own the company or work at the company? I'm going to own the company. I'm going to be a boss, right? Who are you going to date? Who are you going to date? You know what they say? Most people, I'm going to date Smoke Show. Do you guys know Smoke Show? That's actually an East Coast term, but basically it's the guy or the girl that's so hot, like I can't even see them. Just Smoke Show. Can't even get to them. They're so hot. So in other words, everybody's going to own the company, make a lot of money, date the model. In other words, most people will come back and they list these extraordinary things that they want, meaning by definition they're what most people don't have, right? They're rare. And look, it's another question like, should you want those things? Will those things really make you happy? Is it shallow? Like, is it misguided? That's a whole nother debate, right, beyond our discussion. But most people do report those things, okay? Now, one of the little secondary side notes for this, and it depends on the goal of the research, whether trying to identify and also just like the second part of this is like the lesson to be taken from it. So the first part is have a plan. You need to know the destination, and then you need to have a plan to get what you want in life. But here's the second thing: If you are one of those people, by the way, who wants extraordinary things, so let's say you figure out the destination and it's awesome. If you want awesome, if you want extraordinary, by definition, you want out of life what most people don't have, right? And what most people are not going to get. Okay, that doesn't mean you can't get it, but hold on here. If that's what you want, here's what you have. The second part that you have to keep in mind is if you want what most people don't have, if you want extraordinary, to get it, can you do what most people do? No, right? That's Einstein's definition of insanity. But guess what most people do? They go through their life, and even if they know the destination, you know what their plan is? I'm just going to do what everybody else does. And it's just going to work out. Really? You're not going to do what everybody else does and get the same result. If you want to live like nobody else, guess what? You got to live like nobody else. Meaning you have to be willing to do the things that most people won't do. Whether it's work harder, work smarter, right? You have to figure it out. And so, in other words, if you want an extraordinary outcome, you better have an extraordinary plan. That's like the second life lesson to this quote. Now, usually at this point, people are like, okay, thank you, Tony Robbins, but what the heck does this have to do with public speaking? Us making you take this class in most majors, whether you're a communication major or otherwise. Well, here's what it has to do with why we make you take the class, and it deals with one of the very first concepts we're going to talk about in this video, which is called communication variables. Now, what it has to do with, as far as us making you take the class, is that the college wants to make sure, and all of the like businesses and real world jobs in the fields that you're going into want to make sure those employers, right, the people that are successful in the field and want to continue to see other people be successful in those fields, they want to make sure that you have a plan and you're not drifting in terms of communication. Okay, that you're not just like winging it and hoping things go well for you, because you're going to have communication skills. You're going to have to be good in an interview. You're going to have to be good once you get the job under pressure, working with people, having a bedside manner, being sensitive in sensitive situations, right? How do you handle hostile situations? All of these sorts of things. And why do we know employers want that? Because guess what? There are all kinds of studies. These have been done since really the early 2000s, where they look at Fortune 500 companies and they ask those employers, what are you looking for when you hire, not just hire people, but promote people? Because remember, you're going to be a boss. You're going to own the company, right, someday. You're going to be super successful, not just, you're going to thrive in the field, not just survive, right? And guess what? Doesn't matter your major. You could be a nursing student, engineer, doesn't matter. 7 out of 10 of the things they say they're looking for are communication related things. It's, in other words, not even major specific. So, like, let's say you're a nursing student. What I'm trying to tell you is a local hospital isn't going to hire you or make you the head nurse of a particular unit based on, can you show me you understand dosage calculations, medical dosage calculations? They're going to assume you do, because if you don't, they'll just find somebody else who does. Right? You know what they don't know? How well do you handle pressure? Because guess what? There's a shortage of doctors. You know what that means? Nurses are having to take on more and more. Nurses are sometimes the primary point of contact for the patient and the patient's family and those making medical decisions, directives, and things like that, more so than even the doctor. So, can you handle that kind of pressure? Can you be sensitive to people in sensitive situations? That's what I gotta know, right? Not if you understand. The understanding dosage calculations is assumed, right? I gotta know the other things, right? If you're going to be an engineer or like all these other fields, I'm going to assume you understand the basics of physics and math. You know what I don't know? Can you close a deal? Can you just close a development deal in terms of you getting hired on that project? Can you persuade people? What are your communication skills? So here's the thing that employers are telling us about communication is that you need to have a plan. You got to be good at this stuff, right? If there's a plan to be had, and which I'm going to talk about in a second. In other words, are there things you can manipulate? Which, yes, a spoiler. But what employers are telling colleges and people producing people with these degrees and coming out into these fields from prospective prospects is what those employers are saying is, look, we need people that have these skills. The other stuff, that's a given. We can find people with that because everybody coming out with a degree has that, but we need this stuff. So, in other words, the communication, the things that are major specific to you. So, again, you're an engineer and you're understanding of physics and math, or you're a nurse and your understanding of dosage calculations. Those things get you in the door. They make you competent to be, in other words, you're qualified to be interviewed. They do not guarantee your success. They do not guarantee you're going to stay in the field successfully. What's probably going to do that, according to employers, are these other things, these communication skills. And so that's why the college makes you take the class. Because you know what is the goal of the college, this and any institution really, you know what they want? Is they want you to come here, get your degree, and go out and be really successful and happy. Because that means you're a walking billboard for the college, right? You're going to tell other students about your experience, that it worked out well for you and you are happy, and more people are going to come here, right? And pursue these degrees, go into these fields. So that's what the college wants. They want you to be successful. Employers are telling us you need these skills. You need to have a plan. You need to not drift in order to be successful. Now, here's the thing. When I say you got to have a plan, there has to be things that you can manipulate, right? In other words, there has to be a plan to have. There's some things that are just totally out of your control, right? Like, I can't develop a plan as to whether or not I'm going to see a unicorn tomorrow because apparently they're not real, right? I'm sure I could get on YouTube and there's probably somebody, right? I mean, there's a conspiracy theory about everything. There's probably a YouTube channel with like unicorns are real. I don't know. But I can't have a plan to make that happen. So, assuming there's variables you can manipulate with communication, which there are, we want you to do that once you have a plan. So you're successful at it, and so then you're successful in these fields. So we're going to talk about those variables, and that's communication variables, which I mentioned in the preview. So as you go through the PowerPoints, by the way, all of my PowerPoints start out with these list of key concepts that we're going to cover. And as you go back, you review these, you study these are the things that you kind of want to review. Another little side note, I mentioned this in the course introduction video, but I do not regurgitate the reading with my PowerPoints. So we may be discussing a top, like let's say we're going over audience analysis, and the textbook might talk about things 1, 2, and 3 about audience analysis, and the PowerPoint and these video lectures might talk about thing 3, but they'll also talk about thing 4, 5, and 6, right? So it's adding even more content to it. So you can't just sort of just do the reading, ignore the videos, not look at the PowerPoints, but you also want to not just focus on the PowerPoints and videos and not do the reading, right? You really do need to do both. So these are the concepts that we're going to cover, like I mentioned before. And we're going to start out just by defining public speaking and really just kind of talking about the basic forms so you have a context. So in terms of just context of communication, now you can take as far as where we're sitting with this class. Now, you could take courses typically on all of these, and I've actually taught most of these courses as well, but just so you kind of have an idea, and we'll actually have some concepts that weave into these as well. But so you have an idea of the broader perspective. You got intra and interpersonal communication. So intrapersonal communication is basically the things that you tell yourself. It's what's going on inside your head. So think of self-concept, self-esteem, identity, that kind of stuff, right? The things, emotions, like how in your head you're thinking about your emotions, that kind of stuff. So that's intrapersonal communication. Interpersonal communication is basically any communication with two people. So that could be one-on-one, it could be a text message, something like that. Some forms of social media if it's a direct one-on-one kind of thing. But that's, of course, also getting into group communication. Now, group communication is where you have two or more people. So a lot of people, I'm sorry, three or more people. So this is usually done, obviously, in more, you see this in professional settings, obviously with groups to try to achieve a particular goal. And then you also see this, of course, in interpersonal, like friendship groups and things like that. So that's group communication. And then public communication, which is basically public speaking for the most part. So communication, which typically one person is a primary sender, conveying the information to an audience. So there's a lot of these dynamics and variables that we're talking about in a minute that are the same in these settings, but they vary based on these settings. That's kind of why I want you to understand the broader context. So that's what public speaking is. Mass communication is basically, think of media. So this is communication that has been transmitted through print or electronic media. So this is television, movies, broadcast news, that kind of stuff, social media. is this weird hybrid of a lot of these things. Certainly, I think I would consider social media is really mass communication. I think it fits right in there. So, and we're going to talk about some dynamics of social media use in terms of visual aids and how that's kind of used for modern sort of persuasion and adding the visual aesthetic and element to things. So we're actually going to talk a little bit about that in this class, but that's mass communication and media. So those are kind of like the broad perspectives, right, of where communication tends to fall in. Now, in terms of public speaking, what is it? What are we talking about? And uh, this gets confused with what's known as oratory style of speaking. But with public speaking, what you're trying to learn is a conversational style of speaking. And this is, in other words, create a presentation that feels natural, okay, that doesn't feel scripted. So what's the difference? When you turn on Dateline and the person comes on, and you even see this on popular YouTube channels, right, where they're covering a theme or a topic, and you can tell it's really scripted, right? You're watching Dateline and the person walks on, they're like, "It was a cold winter morning, but not as cold as the chill in the Smiths home because Barbie, a mother of two, was missing." Right? I gotta think more names than Barbie, right? I guess I gotta know more people. Um, so it's really scripted, right? Their tone of voice, you can tell all of the gestures, just everything is really scripted. So you see this a lot of times in news broadcasts, and like I said, those types of like news shows where it's a scripted platform at the beginning and stuff like that. And you can even tell the comments throughout the show are scripted, right? Like that they pre-wrote that. And you know that and you get that. Now you don't want to do that with public speaking. Now it could be scripted, but you want it to come across as authentic and natural. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between oratory, which is more what if you take like broadcasting classes or what broadcast journalists are taught, they're taught to script everything. Now, the reason they're taught to script everything is because they're dealing with such a mass audience and that sort of stuff. But if it's a public speaking situation, what I'm trying to get at is when it says conversational style, what that really means is, in order to feel authentic, is that really it should just feel like you're having a conversation with the audience. It's just that you're doing most of the talking, right? And loudly in front of everybody. That's all. You're just like leading the conversation. Now, the reason for that is because in most public speaking situations, right? The audience is there for a reason. They have an interest in the topic. And in the real world, usually it's a financial interest. It deals with business or something like that. And they want to feel that you're authentically presenting to them something that is of use and value to them, right? And hopefully that you really care about the topic or believe in what you're saying. Now, let's just think about this. Like it's not, sometimes learning's remembering, meaning you're going to take a lot of college classes and there's concepts that these things, you maybe just haven't thought about it that way before, right? Or like fleshed it out. So for example, how does it make you feel when somebody's really scripted, right? When you walk into a store and some Best Buy, I don't know, you walk not Best Buy, you walk into like I don't know, you're decking out your new apartment and I don't know, you're buying some stereo system and you walk in and the guy's like, "Welcome to Ed's House of Music, where the only returns we accept are smiles. How can I earn your business today?" Right? So he's very scripted. How can I earn your? It's like if you ever dealt with car sales, they always say that. How can I earn your business today? Only returns we accept are smiles. Do you think the sales clerk there, Dwight, do you think he really cares about whether or not you buy a stereo from Ed's House of Music? Probably not, right? Because he's just going through the motions. I mean, have you ever been approached by somebody and they're going to ask you out, kind of hitting on you, right? And they give you the canned line. I don't. What's a good canned line? Um, I can't think of one. I'm socially retired, so I can't really think of one. I don't interact much anymore. Um, but like some guy that comes up to you and he gives you the can line. Do you think they care very much about you? Right? Probably not. Right? Because they're giving you a line. when people come across scripted, it sounds insecure. I'm sorry, insecure. It sounds insincere, and it turns people off, right? They don't want to hear it anymore because they think you don't really care about them. You don't really believe in what you're saying, right? And so that's why you don't want to do that in a public speaking setting. It needs to sound authentic, even if it is really scripted. So again, in my field, if I approach a jury and there are certain concepts that come up in every case or come up a lot of times in cases. And if I'm going to talk about that concept, maybe some of the lines I use and some of the ways I explained it I've used before and it's scripted. But the jury is not going to believe that my client is facing injustice or needs to be awarded a bunch of money if I'm up there and I'm really monotone, right? If I'm like, today, if my client is looking for resolution of an ongoing saga in which his life was turned upside down by this accident and leg injury. Please do not let these injustices to persevere. Remember, it's not just us, it's justice. And I wink or something, right? If I'm that monotone and scripted, are you going to think that I really think that I personally believe if you do not give my client money, his life's ruined? You're probably not going to believe it, right? And so you don't want to come across scripted. You want to sound authentic, even if it is scripted, right? And we're going to talk about with delivery ways to do that. All right, so that's what public speaking is. Let's get into some of these variables. So here's the thing about communication variables. These are things that you can manipulate in any communicative setting, okay, in order to not be drifting and have things, not be winging it, right? And make things more likely to work out for you, to get the outcome you want. Now, this brings up an important point. This is a social science class. What happens in the social sciences? What it means is when you take a social science class like psychology, sociology, political science, all that kind of stuff, including communication, when we say something A leads to B, it's not a 100% absolute. Okay. So when you're in the hard sciences, when you're in your physics class, and if I'm holding a laser pointer, right, for a PowerPoint in a class, and I say, if I drop the pointer, if the conditions of gravity are present, the pointer will fall to the ground at an equal rate of speed every time, 100% of the time, right? They're looking for absolutes. In the social sciences, we're really looking for things that tip the scales. Does it make it more or less probable? Is it 80%? Is it 50%? Is it 20%? Right? And some of these things are 80, 90%, and some are more to the 50%, right? But does it influence things? That's what we're looking for. Doesn't work all the time because there are in research what's known as what's called individual differences, meaning people react differently to different situations. Sometimes there's different elements involved that can affect that outcome. So doesn't mean they don't work. It means they're not 100% going to work, right? So you still want to use them because obviously they can still help you. Okay, so what do we have here? We have meaning, message, meta message, channel, noise, feedback. So these are in every setting. So let's start out, and we're going to go through some examples of these, but meaning and message. So meaning, this is what you want to convey or are interpretations of a message. Messages is the symbols used. So the first thing we got to kind of like flesh out here is that messages and meaning are not the same thing. Okay? Messages are the verbals, the words, the nonverbals, right? Facial expressions, body posture, that kind of stuff that you use to get across what you mean, right? Meaning is what you're trying to get across or what somebody actually interprets. Now, why are they not the same? Well, they're not the same because for the most part, like 99% of a lot of these things are arbitrary. So in other words, you call a table, but if we always called it a duck since the beginning of the invention of a table, you'd call it a duck, right? The word changes, the symbol changes. It's for the most part arbitrary, but the meaning is still the same, right? So messages and meaning are not the same thing. You need to kind of sort of keep that in mind. And we'll go, why does that matter? We'll talk about some ways that gets manipulated. Meta messages. Now, this actually should say meta. This should be called meta meaning, but your instructor did not create the term, so we're stuck with it. It should have been It should have been called meta meaning. Why? Because they're talking about meaning. Meta messages, non-literal meanings interpreted from messages. So these are kind of things you take from context. In other words, this is if somebody says something to you You take it differently because it's coming from your parents. You take it differently because it's coming from your girlfriend or your boyfriend, right? Or your husband or your wife or your best friend. So that's a context meaning you derive from things. Channel, that's the method used. So this is it in person? Was it a text? Was it online, right? Like, how did you actually communicate this thing? Was it in front of other people if it was in person? Noise, this is anything that distracts you from encoding and decoding the message. Now, by the way, encoding and decoding, you see these terms, these are typically textbook terms, but what they mean is encoding is I have a meaning I want to get across, and so I need to create a message, right? So encode, I need to create the code, right? The message that's going to get that across. Decoding is I just got a message, I got to figure out what that means. I got to interpret it. Okay. So noise are just things that distract us from doing so, and yes, those get manipulated. And then you have feedback. So these are responses to meaning and messages. This next slide here, these are more or less contextual based, and this is where meta messages come into play a lot. And some of these can overlap. They're not mutually exclusive, so they can both kind of be present in a situation. Physical context, this is environmental factors, right, that influence how you interpret something. Psychological context, this is baggage. Do you have baggage? Baggage is a bad term. What it really means is, do you have an emotional or mental factors that coming into the situation that's influencing how you interpret things or how you're gonna act or react, right? So emotions is basically just, are there emotions surrounding the topic, the people involved in the setting? Mental factors is really, it's things like, what I mean by that is, do you have an opinion already, right? Are you already leaning a certain way? Do you already have prior knowledge? That's going to also influence how you interpret something. Okay. Social context. These are the stated rules or unstated norms that guide communication in a setting. So these are things like you're talking to your boss, so you might word things differently, or your parents, right? Or a stranger or a customer. So that influences how you're going to react or act in the situation. And then you have relational context. So this is the interpersonal history and type of relationships you have with that person. So again, this deals with, is it an ex? Is it your best friend? Is it a stranger? That influencing things. And again, meta messages is really a broad category that's kind of defining a lot of these, right? It's really kind of talking about a lot of these factors. And so all of these can kind of be manipulated. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of examples here. And as we go through the course, we're going to cover a lot of different things. Again, we're going to cover speech organization and preparation, how to do that effectively for you to enhance your delivery and also enhance the audience experience. Then we'll talk about verbal and nonverbal delivery, how to use persuasion effectively. We're going to go through all the audience analysis, which is making a speech that is really suited well to the audience you're going to be in front of. So we're going to kind of go through all of that. And as we do, a lot of these different variables are going to come back up, right? So we're going to come back to these. But I do want to give you a couple of examples to make sure that you kind of see how these get manipulated. And we're actually going to start with just some basic like business examples. So I mentioned noise. Noise is anything that distracts you from the actual meaning of the message. So businesses use this all the time. So here's the first example. What is the color scheme of most fast food restaurants? It's usually eccentric colors. So it's things like bright reds, orange, yellow, that kind of stuff. Okay. Well, research into sort of colors and psychology and how do we react to them is people like those colors. But as a general rule, they don't like to be totally engulfed in them all of the time. So in other words, you might have a red shirt, but most people do not paint their room red. Some of you like I do, right? But most people don't. Okay. You may have a red car, but you don't actually stare at the outside of the car. You spend most of your time inside the car. So you get a dose of the color, but not too much. Right? So research kind of shows that if the whole room is kind of engulfed in these things, it kind of like puts people off for the most part, and it makes them just a little bit of anxiety, a little agitated. Now, why would fast food restaurants choose that? Now, by the way, here's why this is noise, and this is a kind of like we're learning some business terms today. But there's something called a value proposition. Have you guys ever heard of a value proposition? So a value proposition is Is the product or service worth the price point? And that's the real message when you walk into McDonald's. It's basically, is a Big Mac worth that price point? That's a value proposition. Is HBO Max worth $14.99 a month or whatever they charge? Okay. That's the real meaning and messages being conveyed. So when you walk in, whatever color scheme McDonald's chooses, that hasn't changed. Or the thing Starbucks is doing, that hasn't changed. So it's a distraction. Now, why choose something that's going to agitate people? Well, what's the business model of most fast food restaurants? They want you to get in and out, right? They don't want you, McDonald's does not make money if you go there, you get a refillable fountain drink, and you just suck up the Wi-Fi all day. You're just charging your phone. You're just sitting there, right? They want you to leave. In fact, when they make more money faster, right? They want you in and out. Okay. Uh, in fact, if anything, they want you to go through the drive-through. They don't even want you to go in. Okay. Another way that they try to manipulate that is they prioritize drive-through orders. Have you ever seen a long drive-through line and you think, well, I'll go in, it'll be faster. And you go in, you still wait forever because they start filling the drive-through orders first. So they also prioritize drive-through orders, right? They don't want to. They want to prioritize the drive-through. So because that's their business model, right? So they're doing subtle things, make the lobby uncomfortable. Another things that these fast food places will do is they'll turn the temperature down, so they'll make it a little cold in there at times to also make it more uncomfortable to sit there. Starbucks does that. So Starbucks in their lobbies will turn the temperature down to make it colder so people will not like just sit there all day, right? They've also started to jack the music up. If you, I don't know how much time you spend. Maybe you're not old like me and spend time in a coffee shop, but you go sit in these coffee shops now, and they've got the music blaring so loud that you can't really have a conversation with somebody, right? And so they're why do that? Because they kind of want you to get your latte and go. So that's what these types of manipulations are. Starbucks, actually, a little side note, they're a weird one in this because they initially wanted you to stay. So part of their model as a coffee chain and part of why they were successful initially was they did spend time building out their lobbies and they promoted this notion of we want you to have your coffee, sit here, study, chat, hang out with friends. They wanted to make it that, but they eventually kind of shifted away from that, and that's when they started doing these things like temperature manipulation and turning the music up more and more and that kind of stuff. So these are examples of manipulating noise. So it's basically just something going on in the environment that's distracting you to sort of get the outcome that they want. Okay. And noise can be internal too. It could be something going on in your head. And we're going to talk about ways that you as the speaker can either, whether it's in your delivery with the things that you say, your verbal delivery or your nonverbals, to try to manipulate how they're reacting to things. But that's what noise is. Okay. If it's something going on inside your head, to give you an example of like an innocent version of that, so not on purpose, this would be like if you're in a class and you're having a hard time paying attention because you're thinking about that you're hungry or you're thinking about a test you have later that day. Okay, that would be internal noise. So it's distracting you. So that's an example of noise. Feedback. So feedback can also be manipulated. And this is kind of one that's a little less intuitive. A lot of people kind of don't, they think, well, how can you manipulate feedback? That doesn't seem to make sense. But look at it this way. It's sort of so it's responses, right, to the presentation or to a situation. Well, you can manipulate feedback. Let me give you an example. If I came in the room and we were in person and it's the very first day when this would probably be the most effective, and I just point somebody out and I say, isn't it true that you're a scumbag? Now, I've made a statement, I've asked a question, right? And you could react to that a lot of different ways, right? Most people probably get very upset by that, right? But you could be defensive, be like, how dare you call me that? You could be very angry, you could be belligerent, you could say it's true, just come clean. You could say you've been reading my diary, you've been reading my girlfriend's diary, my mother-in-law's, everyone who's known me more than 2 months, right? You just admit it, right? Now, here's why I'm controlling the feedback. Because no matter how you respond, we're talking about whether or not you're a scumbag. So I'm controlling the feedback. I'm controlling what you're talking about, what you're focusing on, whether or not you're a scumbag. Attorneys will use this. Sometimes police, like investigators, will use this. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase, but it's whoever's asking questions is in control. Now, why are they in control? In any situation, whoever's asking the questions is in control. You know why? Because they're controlling the topic. We're talking about whether or not you're a scumbag. Now, that's an extreme example, but to just to illustrate the point, but to show you how you would use this with public speaking, it would be like if I come in the room and I say, who would like a 20% return on their investment within 2 weeks? Who wants to shave 10 hours off your work week? Well, if you've got 10 minutes, I'm going to show you how to do both of those things. You know what I basically just did is I just came in the room and I said, who likes to save time? Who likes money? That's all I really did, right? Who likes money? And you're like, I do. Basic, and really, even if you even want to more break it down, pull back the curtain and see the wizard. What I really did is I came in the room and I said, look, squirrel over here, shiny object. Now, it may be true that what I'm about to tell you is going to save you time and make you money. So it doesn't mean it's disingenuous. It doesn't mean it's a lie. But by doing that, by coming in and saying who likes money, or it could be in the middle of the speech, who wants to save time, I'm getting you to focus on the shiny object over here. I'm getting you to focus on time. I'm getting you to focus on money. Now, if I'm sincerely going to provide you with those outcomes and those things, then great. Now, sometimes, the reason I use the Wizard of Oz analogy, sometimes it's disingenuous. In other words, sometimes they're doing that to manipulate you. Look, squirrel, shiny object over here, AKA pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. In other words, I want you to focus on money, 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 so you don't see all the holes in my arguments or the things that I'm telling you that you could drive a truck through, because it's filled with, it's like Swiss cheese over here, right? I'm trying to get you distracted. Right, this happens a lot. So like when I in terms of criminal law cases, this happens a lot with like these frauds, financial crimes, is that one of the ironies is that oftentimes the people, like, think of like the Bernie Madoffs, the people that steal money from people, like cons and scams. A lot of time, not all the time, but a lot of times the irony is that so a con artist in those situations, they take advantage of the victim's greed. Because what they do is they come in the room and they say, money, money, money. You're going to make a lot of money. You're going to get a 50% return in 2 weeks, every month. In other words, unrealistic returns. And people are so focused on the money they're going to get, the greed, that they don't do their homework on why are the things that I'm telling you, why do they not make sense? Right? Why are they deceptive? The reason they don't see it's a scam is because they don't want to see it. They're over here. They're looking at money. Right? And so you can manipulate feedback. Obviously, in this class, we're going to focus on ways to do that. A lot of times with your verbal delivery, but ways to do that in a positive way, right? Like ways to do that to get people to focus on the things that matter, that are important to them, that's going to make your message more persuasive or more impactful, right? Or more helpful to them. So you can manipulate feedback. All right. So that concludes the first part of this video. In the second part of this lecture, we're going to keep talking about these examples and begin to go into communication apprehension and public speaking anxiety.